What would you do if one day you found out that a family member had stolen something expensive from you? I've been in that situation. My younger sister stole my $20,000 Rolex. When I confronted her, she didn't show the slightest remorse. She even had the nerve to challenge me. That set off my grandfather, a war veteran, and he got truly furious. He didn't say much. He quietly walked into the storage shed and returned with a gasoline can. That one action sent my parents and sister into a full-blown panic. They were screaming in fear. So what did he do next? Stick around. I'll tell you exactly what happened. Hello, everyone. My name is Evelyn. I'm 30 years old and a software engineer working in San Jose, California. I live in a 4-bedroom house in the suburbs with my grandfather, Frank. This is the home I bought 3 years ago, entirely with my own money after grinding for 5 years at various tech companies across Silicon Valley. Life for us now is peaceful and happy. My grandfather is 78 this year, but still strong, sharp-minded, and incredibly straightforward. He's a war veteran with a firm, no-nonsense personality. He doesn't tolerate any injustice. The bond between my grandfather and me is truly special. He's the one who understands me best and has always backed me through every major decision I've made in life. Besides Grandpa, my parents and my younger sister Jessica also lived in this house. But after a major family drama that blew up exactly 1 year ago, I had to make the hardest life decision. My story began exactly 1 year ago. It was a typical weekday in early July, and I was sitting in my office, deep in planning for a new project. Out of nowhere, my phone started buzzing with an incoming call. I glanced at the screen and saw Grandpa Frank's name pop up. Without a second of hesitation, I answered as I greeted him with my usual, "Hey, Grandpa." He cut me off with a rushed, anxious voice. "Evelyn, I just saw Jessica walk out of your room. She had a watch in her hand." Hearing that hit me like a lightning bolt. My heart started pounding in my chest. I quickly thanked him and hung up, my mind spiraling with 100 thoughts. With trembling hands, I opened the home security app on my phone. Time slowed to a crawl as I rewound the footage from earlier that afternoon. And then the thing I feared most showed up on the screen. As clear as day, I saw Jessica sneak into my room and walk straight to the glass cabinet holding my prized watch collection. I paused the footage and zoomed in. My throat tightened as I realized the watch she took was my Rolex Submariner date, worth $20,000. It was the most expensive timepiece I owned, something I'd bought just a few months earlier to celebrate my promotion at work. It wasn't just about the money. That watch symbolized years of effort and personal achievement. As I finished watching the video, another detail hit me. In my rush to work that morning, I'd forgotten to lock my bedroom door, something I usually never skipped. That single careless moment had allowed Jessica to slip in unnoticed. Sitting there in my office, I felt torn in half. On one hand, the camera footage was undeniable. Jessica had stolen from me. But on the other hand, part of me still hesitated, still clung to the hope that maybe she just borrowed it to look at and planned to return it later. I even asked myself whether I should call the police right away. I looked up at the wall clock. Only 2 hours left in the workday. I decided to wait. At that point, I still wanted to believe that Jessica would bring it back. I tried to focus on wrapping up the rest of my tasks, but my mind wouldn't stop racing, thinking about what she had done and what might come next. At precisely 5:00 p.m., when work ended, I quickly packed up my desk and bolted out of the office like a woman on a mission. The entire drive home, my heart was pounding, not just from anxiety, but from a sliver of hope that maybe, just maybe, I had gotten it all wrong. When I finally pulled into the driveway, I noticed it was just Grandpa and me at home. My parents and Jessica weren't back yet, and the house felt eerily quiet. Without wasting a second, I parked and rushed inside, running straight up to my room with one last, desperate hope that this was all a misunderstanding. My hands trembled as I opened the glass cabinet, and there it was, the cold, brutal truth. The watch was gone. In that moment, a wave of anger and disappointment crashed over me. The Rolex Submariner date wasn't just some flashy luxury item. I had carefully stored it in my bedroom's display case like a prized possession. I only wore it on special occasions, and Grandpa knew how much it meant to me. He'd always remind me to protect it like gold. I remembered all those times Jessica would stand in front of the case, staring at the collection with that unmistakable look of envy, constantly asking questions about the most expensive watch. That obsessive interest had always made me uneasy, and I'd warned her more than once. Don't touch anything in my room, especially the watches. But after what happened today, it was clear she never cared about those warnings. And honestly, I wasn't surprised. This was exactly what came from years of our parents spoiling her. Jessica had always been shielded, always forgiven, never honestly held accountable for her actions. Standing in front of that empty display case, it felt like the world was falling apart. Not just because I'd lost something valuable, but because I realized my sister betrayed me, someone I had always loved and trusted. To help you fully understand how this all unfolded, I need to tell you about my family members and the background that led up to this whole mess. My father, Paul Miller, is 55 and has worked in the insurance industry for over 30 years. His income is modest, but he's constantly under financial pressure. What worries me most is his bad habit of living beyond his means, spending more than he earns, and never learning how to save. My mother, Kelsey Miller, is 53 and works part-time at a small neighborhood bookstore. Her income isn't much, barely enough to cover some daily living expenses. She's gentle by nature and easily emotional. Then there's my younger sister, Jessica Miller. She was 22 at the time, a college senior about to graduate. Jessica had been spoiled by the whole family growing up, and as a result, she developed a self-centered personality and an obsession with expensive luxury items. Anything shiny, costly, or designer instantly caught her attention. In 2023, my parents lost all their savings after a failed investment venture with a friend. They were forced to sell the house Grandpa had given them years ago to pay off their debts. Once the house was gone, they had nowhere to go. They were effectively homeless. Desperate, my parents came to me, asking to stay at my place temporarily while they tried to get back on their feet. At first, I flat out refused. I knew my family well and didn't want my peaceful life turned upside down. But then they played their final card. They brought up Grandpa Frank. He had been living with them at the time, and the thought of Grandpa suffering broke my resolve. Ultimately, I agreed to let the whole family move in, rent-free, hoping this would be a short-term solution while they got things together. At first, things seemed okay. We all shared the space and household responsibilities peacefully, but gradually, cracks began to show. Jessica started asking me for money, first for textbooks, then for tuition, then for personal expenses. At first, I lent it to her because I genuinely wanted to help, but she never paid me back. And when I brought it up, she'd always find a way to dodge the conversation. Whenever I complained, my parents immediately jumped to her defense with their usual line, "Family needs to understand each other." They always made excuses for her, which left me feeling like I was the selfish, heartless one. Things escalated when Jessica began helping herself to my belongings. It started with my laptop. She said hers was broken, then my headphones, then other stuff. Whenever I caught her, she had some convenient excuse and promised to return it, but she never did. The tension peaked about a month before the watch incident. Jessica entered my room and noticed the watch collection inside the glass display case. Her eyes lit up in a way that honestly scared me. She kept gushing about how beautiful they were, asking the value of each one, especially the Rolex Submariner date. After that moment, I felt strongly that I needed to protect my things. So I installed a tiny hidden camera pointed directly at the cabinet that held my watch collection. I never imagined that little camera would become the most crucial piece of evidence, the one that captured crystal clear footage of Jessica stealing my Rolex. Around 6:00 p.m., the front door opening signaled that my parents had just gotten home. Not even a full minute later, Jessica walked in too, probably timing her arrival carefully to avoid suspicion. When they entered the living room, all three looked genuinely surprised to see Grandpa and me sitting seriously and waiting. Usually I'd be showering or relaxing in my room at that hour. Once everyone was home, I asked them to sit on the couch because I had something important to discuss. The atmosphere immediately grew tense. Grandpa sat in his usual armchair, watching everyone closely with his sharp, discerning gaze, like he was reading every flicker of emotion on their faces. When they were all seated, I started the conversation that would change everything. Looking each of them in the eye, I calmly asked, "My Rolex went missing today. Does anyone know anything about it?" When the words left my mouth, Jessica reacted with an over-the-top, obviously fake look of shock. I have no idea what you're talking about. Maybe you just misplaced it. My parents quickly jumped in too, acting concerned, as if genuinely worried about the loss. Trying to sound caring, my mom asked, "Are you sure it's missing?" "Maybe you just forgot where you put it," and my dad chimed in with what sounded like a reasonable guess. "Could it be at the office?" Maybe, but something about how they responded felt off, too rehearsed and controlled. I looked past them, then turned my eyes back to Jessica and asked again, locking eyes with her, "Are you sure you don't know anything?" She stuck to her lie, now trying to sound offended. "Why would you even accuse me? I would never take your stuff." Then my dad stepped in to defend her. "You're accusing Jessica? That's ridiculous." At that point, I decided it was time to stop playing along. Slowly, I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened the security camera app. The room went dead silent. I looked at Jessica one more time, my voice calm but firm. "Then explain this." I turned the phone around and hit play. The screen showed crystal clear footage of Jessica sneaking into my room at precisely 3 p.m. that afternoon, reaching into the display case and taking the Rolex. The evidence was undeniable, right there in full view. Even with the evidence on my phone screen, Jessica still tried to deny it. Recklessly, desperately, she stammered, "I was just in your room to get something else." That pathetic excuse made my blood boil. I scrubbed through the footage until she opened the glass case and deliberately reached for the watch. The video was crystal clear. There was no mistaking her intent. My voice turned ice cold as I asked, "Huh? Then why is it the most expensive watch I own that you accidentally took?" Instead of letting her answer, my parents jumped in to defend their precious daughter. My mom immediately spoke up, pleading, "Jessica probably just wanted to borrow it. She didn't mean to steal, honey." My dad chimed in too, acting like I was overreacting. "This is a family matter. Do we need to blow it out of proportion?" Hearing them unquestioningly defend Jessica made something inside me snap. I erupted. "Borrow without asking? Sneaking into someone's room and taking their stuff? That's stealing." Realizing things were turning against her, Jessica suddenly broke into dramatic tears. "I was only going to borrow it for a few days. I didn't mean anything bad." Of course, when she cried, my parents rushed to her side like clockwork. My dad immediately said, "See? She just wanted to borrow it. Don't make this into a big deal." Then, at the height of the tension, Grandpa Frank, who'd been silently watching this whole time, finally spoke. His voice was calm, but carried the weight of a hammer. 22 years old and still doesn't know right from wrong. That sentence hit the room like a thunderclap. Everything fell silent. Sensing the moment, I made my final offer. I looked Jessica dead in the eye and said, "Give the watch back and I'll let this go." But instead of showing remorse, Jessica snapped, her voice defiant and stubborn. "I told you I was going to return it after a few days." That was it. My last thread of patience snapped. My voice was firm, final, and loud enough to make everyone freeze. "Give it back now or I'm calling the police." That threat hit like a bomb. And for the first time, everyone in the room realized I wasn't bluffing anymore. When they could no longer deny the truth, and after I threatened to call the police, the whole family seemed to silently switch to a completely different tactic, using family ties to guilt-trip me. My dad spoke up with a tone like I was completely overreacting. "Evelyn, don't blow this out of proportion. Jessica was going to borrow it for a few days." Right after that, my mom added a moral lecture. Family is supposed to support one another, not take each other to court. Jessica, seeing her parents defending her, immediately burst into tears and said in a voice that made it sound like I was the one being cruel, "It's just a watch, Evelyn. Do you have to make such a big scene over this?" Sensing that this strategy might work, my dad pushed the guilt trip further. He told me, "In a family, it's normal to share things. What you're doing is tearing this family apart, Evelyn." Hearing all this felt like being bitten by a swarm of fire ants. They were trying to paint me as the bad guy, like I was heartless, like I didn't care about family, just because I dared to demand what rightfully belonged to me. While all this arguing was happening, I noticed Grandpa was still sitting silently in his armchair, watching every word and gesture. But the look in his eyes and how his hands gripped the armrest tightly told me everything. He was furious. Grandpa was never the kind to show emotion easily, but what was happening in front of him, his granddaughter stealing and then being shielded and excused by her parents, had pushed him to the edge. I knew that in Grandpa's mind, this behavior was unacceptable. With everything he'd seen and lived through, He understood the difference between real love and toxic indulgence. The air in the living room kept getting heavier, and it hit me hard. I was standing alone facing my entire family while they tried to make theft seem like no big deal. Seeing Jessica's stubborn attitude and how my parents defended her, Grandpa didn't say another word. Suddenly, he quietly stood up from his armchair and left the living room without saying anything. His movements were slow but deliberate, carrying an intensity everyone could feel in the air. I watched him head straight for the door, walking toward the small storage shed at the end of the yard. A strange feeling of dread rose in my chest, like something serious was about to happen. Meanwhile, my parents and Jessica were still arguing with me, completely unaware that Grandpa had left the room. They just kept repeating the same excuses and lines about family and forgiveness, like saying them enough times would somehow make stealing okay. At that point, I wasn't just angry. I was exhausted, not just because the watch was gone, but because my family was twisting reality to make me look like the villain for simply wanting back what belonged to me. About 5 minutes later, heavy footsteps echoed from the back door while the argument was still heating up. There was something different about the sound that made everyone stop talking and turn their heads. And then Grandpa walked in, and what we saw left the entire room in shock. In his hand was a red gasoline can, which he used to fuel the lawnmower. His face was stern. His eyes were cold and locked onto each of us. He didn't say a word, didn't make a single gesture to explain himself. He just stood there holding that gas can. The living room fell into absolute silence. No one dared breathe loudly. No one moved a muscle. The only sound left was the ticking of the wall clock, echoing through a room so tense it felt like the air had stopped moving. Seeing Grandpa standing there with the gas can in his hand, the entire family froze like statues. No one could believe what we were witnessing. My dad stammered, his voice shaking. "Dad, what are you doing?" But Grandpa didn't answer. He just kept walking silently out to the front yard, each step heavy, deliberate, and filled with a chilling sense of purpose. We followed him like puppets, saying nothing, moving only because instinct told us to. Outside in the driveway sat 2 cars. My parents' silver Toyota Camry and Jessica's red Honda Civic. Then Grandpa began to act. He rapidly opened the gas can and started pouring gasoline over the Toyota, from the hood to the trunk. The sharp chemical smell of fuel filled the air. My mom screamed in panic, "Dad, what are you doing? Please stop." But Grandpa didn't flinch. He moved on to Jessica's Civic, dousing every inch with the same terrifying calm, ensuring no corner was missed. Jessica screamed through her sobs. "Grandpa, please don't. That's my car. I need it for school." My dad, now in a full panic, rushed forward to stop him. "Dad, please, we can sit down and talk this out." That's when Grandpa finally stopped. He slowly turned to face his son, my dad, his eyes like ice. The entire yard went dead silent. With a voice like steel, Grandpa asked, "In this family, sharing each other's things is normal, right?" Everyone held their breath. It was the same sentence my dad had used minutes earlier to excuse what Jessica did. After a few seconds of tense silence, Grandpa looked around at all of them with fury in his eyes, then said, "Then these 2 cars are mine now. I can use them however I want." And with that, he slowly pulled a lighter from his shirt pocket, gripping it firmly in his hand. That one move sent the whole family into full-blown panic. Seeing the lighter in Grandpa's hand, both my dad and Jessica cried out in panic. My dad shouted, his voice trembling, "Dad, please don't. We were wrong. I'm sorry." Jessica sobbed uncontrollably, her voice choked with fear. "Grandpa, please don't burn my car. I'm sorry. I know I messed up." But Grandpa stood there stone-faced, completely emotionless. He slowly raised the lighter, his thumb hovering over the spark wheel. In that moment, time seemed to stop. Then he shouted, "Get on your knees!" My dad and Jessica froze, stunned. They stared at him, eyes wide in disbelief, as if they couldn't comprehend that this 78-year-old man had just uttered those words. Seeing them still frozen in place, Grandpa shouted again, this time louder and sharper. "I said, get on your knees!" The command struck like a hammer. My dad, Paul Miller, the man who always saw himself as the head of the household, dropped to his knees on the cold ground. His hands were trembling. His voice cracked. "I'm sorry, Dad. I know I was wrong." Jessica was still standing, her face soaked in tears. That's when Grandpa turned to her, his eyes ice cold without pity. "Not kneeling? Fine. Then say goodbye to your car." He moved his hand toward the ignition wheel, just inches from producing a spark. One flick, and it would all go up in flames. Jessica was so terrified she nearly fainted. She dropped to her knees beside my dad, her whole body shaking. My mom stood at a distance, crying silently, paralyzed with fear. She didn't dare move closer. She knew Grandpa had entered a state that no one could predict or control. Grandpa looked down at my father, kneeling in the dirt, and his face was as stern as a judge passing sentence. In a voice cold as steel, he asked, "Paul, do you even know how to raise a child?" My dad lowered his head, unable to meet his father's gaze. In a quiet, broken voice, he replied, "I know I failed, Dad. I didn't raise Jessica the right way." Grandpa nodded slowly, then issued a command that allowed no room for refusal. "Then tell your daughter to return the watch and apologize to Evelyn." Without hesitation, my dad turned to Jessica, his voice shaking but firm. "You need to give the watch back to Evelyn and apologize, sincerely. No more excuses." What I was witnessing felt like a nightmare. My father and my sister both on their knees before Grandpa, while the pungent stench of gasoline filled the fading evening air. Even kneeling on the cold ground, Jessica refused to admit her wrongdoing fully. Instead of showing remorse, she continued trying to justify what she did. In a defiant tone, she said, "It's just a watch. Does it have to be this serious?" Hearing that, Grandpa's face turned bright red with rage. His eyes lit up like fire, showing a fury I rarely saw in him. He shouted, "What? You're still arguing? Even now, you don't know you're wrong?" Then he made a move like he was about to flick the lighter. My dad, now in complete panic, nearly screamed, "Jessica, apologize to Evelyn right now. Stop arguing." But Jessica remained stubborn to the bitter end, her voice shaky but still defiant. "I didn't do anything wrong. I was borrowing it. I was going to give it back in a few days." Watching this unfold, I could see Grandpa's anger boiling over. His hand holding the lighter was shaking, not from fear, but from sheer fury. In a voice as cold as ice, he said, 22 years old. You still can't tell right from wrong. You steal and then try to argue your way out of it." Then he looked straight at Jessica, his voice filled with contempt. "Someone like you doesn't deserve to live in this house." After Grandpa's scolding, Jessica burst into tears again, but even in her desperation, she tried to shift the blame. "You're just taking Evelyn's side. You're not being fair." That was the last straw. Grandpa had run entirely out of patience. He made a move to ignite the lighter, but just then a police siren pierced the air, growing louder as it approached. That siren hit like a lightning bolt in the middle of the storm. Everyone turned to look toward the road where a police cruiser was approaching the house. A patrol car was driving down the street in front of our home when it suddenly slowed down. Alarmed by the unusual scene in our yard, they must have noticed something was off. The group of people gathered outside, the heavy stench of gasoline in the air. Two officers quickly stepped out of the vehicle, hands resting near their radios, ready to call in backup if needed. As they approached the scene, the older officer asked, "What's going on here?" The moment they spotted the puddles of gasoline on the ground, the lighter in Grandpa's hand, and the two cars soaked in fuel, their demeanor shifted instantly. Both officers moved into high alert. The older officer issued a sharp command. "Sir, put the lighter on the ground. Now." Without protest, Grandpa slowly bent down and placed the lighter carefully on the ground, away from the fuel-soaked area. Once the situation was under control, the second officer turned to us and asked, "Can someone explain what exactly is happening here?" My dad and Jessica were still kneeling on the ground, too shaken to move without Grandpa's say-so. They just looked up, eyes pleading for someone to intervene. I stepped forward and spoke clearly to the officers. "Officer, my sister stole my $20,000 Rolex. I have clear security camera footage as proof." After hearing my explanation, the older officer looked down at Jessica, still on her knees, and asked her, "Ma'am, can you confirm this?" Through tears, her body trembling, Jessica replied, "I was just borrowing it, not stealing. I was going to give it back." Hearing that, the older officer shook his head and calmly explained, "Taking someone's property without permission is considered theft under the law." The second officer added, "And with something valued at $20,000, we're looking at a felony-level offense." Then Grandpa spoke up, his voice calm but unshakably firm. "Evelyn, let her go to jail. Let her learn what it means to respect other people's property." His words dropped like a bomb. The entire family was stunned. My mom covered her mouth in horror. My dad looked up with eyes full of disbelief. Jessica sobbed like her whole world had just collapsed. After hearing the whole story, one of the officers turned to me and asked, Do you want to file an official report for this theft? That question cut through the tension like a blade. My parents looked at me with pleading eyes as if their lives depended on what I said next. My mom broke down and begged, "Evelyn, please don't do this to Jessica. I'm begging you." Without waiting, my dad chimed in, his voice shaking. "Think about Jessica's future. You can't destroy your sister's life." But instead of remorse, Jessica snapped in anger, shouting, "You can't do this to me. I'm your sister." Even at this point, her defiance lit a fire inside me. I turned and looked the officer dead in the eye, then said, "Yes, I want to file an official theft report." My words dropped like a death sentence. The entire family was stunned, frozen in disbelief that I had gone through with it. Without hesitation, the officer gave a professional nod and said, "All right, we'll begin documenting everything and proceed with the necessary steps." As soon as he said that, Grandpa smiled with quiet satisfaction and told me, "That's right. Let her learn what fear feels like. You can't let thieves walk away without consequences." His words landed like a final verdict, confirming my decision was justified. While my parents and Jessica remained in shock, I felt something unexpected, a strange sense of relief. Justice had finally been served. In that moment, I knew one thing for sure: my family would never be the same again. But that was a price I was willing to pay to stand up for what's right. After I confirmed that I wanted to file the report, the two officers began documenting the case professionally. They pulled out a notepad and a voice recorder, preparing to log every detail of the incident. I took out my phone and showed them the security footage when asked. The video showed Jessica sneaking into my room and taking the watch, undeniable high-resolution proof. Once they finished reviewing the footage and confirmed the evidence was solid, the older officer stepped toward Jessica with a pair of handcuffs. She was still kneeling, trembling. The officer spoke firmly. "Jessica Miller, you are under arrest for stealing high-value property." Then he began reading her Miranda rights. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in court." As the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, Jessica broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. She turned to me and screamed, "Evelyn, please don't do this. Just give me a week. I'll give the watch back. I'm sorry. I mean it this time." But it was too late. The officers had finished the arrest procedure and were preparing to escort her to the car. Seeing their daughter being taken away, my parents panicked and chased after the police cruiser. My mom cried out, pleading, "Please, officers. She's just a young girl. Please give her another chance." Trying to help them understand, one of the officers calmly explained, "Theft of property valued over $5,000 is classified as a felony under California state law." He continued, "She could be sentenced to anywhere from 1 to 3 years in prison, depending on the court's ruling." Upon hearing that, my mom collapsed to the ground as if struck by lightning, sobbing uncontrollably. Watching her daughter in handcuffs being loaded into the police car was more than she could bear. My dad rushed to help her up, then turned back toward me, his face twisted in anger. "Are you happy now? You got what you wanted?" I stayed silent. I didn't say a word. But he kept going, shouting, "You've destroyed this family, Evelyn. Are you satisfied now?" Before I could respond, Grandpa Frank stepped forward and answered for me, his voice cold and firm. "Evelyn didn't destroy this family. Jessica did. She made her choice." Grandpa's words were the final verdict, an unshakable declaration of who was responsible for what had happened. After Jessica was taken away and the police car drove off, we stood in front of the house in a heavy, suffocating silence. The air still reeked of gasoline, and tears hadn't yet dried on anyone's face. Standing tall in front of my parents, I looked them in the eye and said firmly, "After what happened today, I'm asking both of you to leave this house. You have 30 days starting today." My parents were stunned, frozen in disbelief. They stood there like statues, mouths open, completely speechless. Then my dad exploded, shouting in fury, "You're kicking your father out? Have you lost your conscience?" I didn't let emotion sway me. I continued, "In the next 3 days, you'll receive a formal notice through certified mail." Hearing that, my mom collapsed to the ground, begging through her tears, "Please, daughter, I'm begging you, don't do this." But I stood firm in my decision. You've lived here rent-free for a year. No bills, no responsibilities, and instead of being grateful, you defended a thief and tried to make me the villain. I can't live with people who don't know the difference between right and wrong. Hearing those words, my father's face turned pale with rage. He pointed a trembling finger at me and shouted, "You'll pay for this, Evelyn." But no matter how much they screamed, cried, or threatened, I didn't waver. Grandpa stood silently beside me. saying nothing. But his presence was loud enough. He stood with me like a pillar of strength, a silent confirmation that I was doing the right thing. Seeing that I wouldn't back down, my parents resorted to their final tactic, begging Grandpa to intervene. In desperation, my father dropped to his knees in front of him and pleaded, "Dad, please, I'm begging you, talk to Evelyn." Right after, my mother knelt beside him, crying and begging as well. "We know we were wrong. Please give us a chance to make things right." Grandpa looked down at the two of them kneeling before him. His face was blank, no trace of sympathy, no emotion. His eyes were cold, like he was looking at strangers. After a long silence, he spoke, his voice cutting and emotionless. "You had an entire year to show who you were, and you chose to defend a thief instead of standing for truth and justice. Now you want forgiveness? It's too late." That single sentence was the final judgment. A closed door, the end of any last hope my parents had. The following 30 days became the most tense and miserable stretch this house had ever seen. The air felt so heavy, it was like you could cut through it with a knife. My parents struggled to find a new place to live, facing constant challenges with their limited income. With its sky-high prices, renting in San Jose forced them to search desperately for more affordable options. During that time, Jessica was released on bail under my parents' responsibility while awaiting trial. They scraped together enough money to rent her a tiny rundown room so she could stay until her court date. After consulting with a lawyer, they were told bluntly, with surveillance footage that clear, Jessica had almost no chance of avoiding conviction. Throughout those 30 days, my parents' attitude did a complete 180. The arrogance and entitlement they once carried vanished. They became timid and quiet, as if walking on eggshells in their temporary home. What stood out most was that they could no longer look me or Grandpa in the eye. They would lower their heads and quickly walk away whenever we crossed paths in the house. My mother began cooking nice meals for Grandpa, an apparent attempt at a late apology, hoping to soften the situation. My dad, too, would awkwardly ask about Grandpa's health from time to time, fumbling through small talk like a man who no longer knew how to speak to his father. But Grandpa was unmoved. At one point, he said coldly, "Now you remember respect. Now that you've been told to leave, suddenly you feel regret." Through it all, I felt a strange, quiet relief. Kicking them out wasn't easy, but it was the right decision. I didn't regret it. One quiet weekend evening, Grandpa and I sat on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the hills. He suddenly turned to me, and there was something warm in his eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time. He slowly placed a hand on my shoulder and said, with emotion in his voice, "I'm proud of you, Evelyn. So proud." In that moment, my throat tightened. Praise from my grandfather, the man I respected most, meant more than anything else ever could. The 30th day finally arrived. From early morning, the sounds of packing and moving echoed through the house. My parents were finishing up, gathering the last of their belongings. After weeks of searching, they had finally secured a small apartment in another part of San Jose, much farther from the familiar area, and certainly a far cry from the comfort of this house. The atmosphere in the house that day was suffocatingly quiet and tense. No one dared raise their voice. Every movement was cautious, deliberate, almost fragile. As my mother stepped into the room she had called home for the past year, she paused at the doorway. I saw her shoulders trembling. Then the tears came, slow at first, then steady. She stood there silently, staring at the now empty room as if trying to memorize every corner of what had once been her home. In that moment, a complicated feeling rose in my chest. Not regret, but a strange blend of sadness and relief. Grandpa Frank stood quietly at the edge of the living room doorway throughout the moving process. He said nothing, simply observing everything with a calm, unreadable expression. You couldn't guess what was going through his mind. Finally, the last moving truck was loaded and drove off. The sound of its engine faded slowly down the road, leaving behind an almost surreal silence. As we stood there watching the truck disappear into the distance, Grandpa exhaled and said with a quiet sense of release, "At last, this house is peaceful again." Hearing him say that, I suddenly felt a massive weight lift off my shoulders. The house was now just the two of us, two people who understood and respected each other, and in that moment I knew with absolute clarity I had made the right decision, no matter how painful. 2 months after Jessica's arrest, the official trial took place. She was charged with felony grand theft at the Santa Clara County Courthouse. Grandpa and I were present in the courtroom as key witnesses. Jessica's defense attorney did everything he could to lessen the severity of the charge. He stood and addressed the judge. Your Honor, the defendant is only 22 years old, still very young. This may have been a youthful mistake, not something that should ruin her entire future. But the prosecutor wasn't about to let it slide. She detailed the security footage and made a strong, convincing argument to the court. The prosecutor stated firmly, Your Honor, this was not a momentary lapse in judgment or a careless mistake. The defendant planned this. She waited until no one was home and deliberately entered a private room to steal the most valuable item in the house. She knew exactly what that watch was worth and actively tried to conceal her actions afterward. When the judge asked for Jessica's response, she weakly tried to defend herself. I just meant to borrow it for a few days. I didn't mean to steal it. The judge looked directly at her and asked, Then why didn't you ask your sister for permission before taking it? Jessica went silent. She had no answer to that simple question. The judge continued, asking what she had done with the watch. At that point, Jessica was forced to admit the humiliating truth. I sold it and got $12,000. I used the money to repay my credit card debt and some friends' debt. I'd been spending way too much. After weighing all the facts, the court delivered its final ruling. The judge declared, This court sentences the defendant, Jessica Miller, to 18 months in jail. He added, The defendant must also pay $20,000 in restitution to her sister, Evelyn Miller, the full value of the watch, as well as $3,000 in court costs. As the sentence was read, Jessica's parents wept openly in the courtroom. Their cries were filled with anguish, but they could do nothing to change the outcome. As for me, I sat there feeling an unexpected calm wash over me. Justice had finally been served, fairly and thoroughly. Beside me, Grandpa Frank leaned in and whispered, That's right, sweetheart. There have to be real consequences for bad actions. It's the only way people learn. It's been exactly 1 year since the Rolex incident and all the chaos that came with it. Grandpa Frank and I are peaceful, stable, and genuinely happy today. On the professional side, I've been promoted to senior software engineer at my company, and my income has increased significantly. Grandpa Frank is still in excellent health. He wakes up early every day, reads the paper, and tends to the little garden out back. We have long conversations every evening, and I value his wisdom more every day. As for my family, my parents still call occasionally, but the relationship has never returned to what it once was. The calls are short, polite, but distant. I continue to respect them as the people who gave me life, but the trust and closeness we once shared are gone for good. Jessica is still serving her 18-month sentence. I've never visited her, never reached out, and I don't intend to. My story about the Rolex and everything that followed ends here. I'm not telling this story to seek sympathy or agreement, and I'm certainly not telling it to shame my family. I'm sharing it because of one lesson I've come to understand deeply. Sometimes real love doesn't mean excusing every mistake. Sometimes true love means setting firm boundaries and allowing people to face the consequences of their actions. And most importantly, I want you to know, family isn't just defined by blood. Family is made of the people who respect you, support you, and stand by your side when you need them the most. Thank you for listening to my story. And before I end it, I have one question for you. What would you do if your sister stole your watch? If you were in my shoes, would you call the police or stay silent and let it go because she's family? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I genuinely want to hear what you think. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share the story to support us. See you next time with more stories to come.